Hello, and welcome to Mishnah Mondays. I hope that nothing got lost in the messaging. This is our regular Mishnah class, but it's also going to be a special pre-Shavuot. We're going to be doing something special for the next 5 weeks, but we are going to be studying the Mishnah. So for those of you who come regularly to our Mishnah class, I hope you don't think it's on hiatus. I'm actually speaking to people who may not be here. Maybe they thought that they weren't going to get their regular dose of Mishnah. I hear a loud sound, so somebody check your mutes if you can. Okay, so let's just set the stage here, and then we'll get into it. The Mishnah, for those of you who don't come regularly, is the first major code of Jewish law. It's put together in, we think, the year 220 of the Common Era, and it's mostly a legalistic text. It's mostly just a collection of laws and practices, and we study. You should come every Monday. We study these laws and practices just as a way of fortifying our basic Jewish knowledge, and I think that the Mishnah is maybe the best way to do that, just to get that kind of core, like the birth of the Judaism that we know, right? There's the Torah, and then really the Mishnah is the next major text that one would want to look at in the canon. Right now, in the period between Passover and Shavuot, there's a tradition to study a particular tractate of the Mishnah, and it's actually the most famous tractate of the Mishnah, and that is Tractate Avot, which literally means fathers or ancestors. And Mishnah Avot is different from all of the other tractates in the 6 orders of the Mishnah, in that it is not explicitly legalistic. There is a kind of hortatory, you should do this feeling to it, but it's not laws that we're going to be studying, but ethics. It really is the collection, the rabbinic collection of ethical sayings, reflections, proverbs. Okay, these are the great sort of the great quotes from the rabbis on how the wisdom of how to live. The most famous is, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? That's from the Mishnah Avot. That's Hillel the Elder said that one. But anyway, there's this tradition to study Mishnah Avot between Passover and Shavuot as a way of Passover being the Exodus holiday. We left Egypt, and Shavuot has become the revelation holiday. We stood at Mount Sinai. And there's this in itself is worth thinking about. There's a tradition to study ethics as a way of preparing ourselves to receive revelation. That already is quite a profound thing to say, that in order to experience God, to experience revelation, in order to prepare ourselves for that great moment, we should be studying ethics. We should be studying the ways and the rights and wrongs of how we treat each other. Okay, so that takes us into a particular spin that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking through, I should say, the lens that we're going to be looking through for the next 5 weeks, because I've called this series "The Ethics of the Mystics." Ethics of the Mystics. And now the reason is the frame for our course of study is that we have an opportunity in studying Mishnah Avot, this particular tractate, to look at commentaries that we don't usually get to see. For those of you who come to the Mishnah class regularly, you know that we're looking at legalistic discussions, and so the commentaries are all the great legal minds of Jewish tradition, trying to hash out the details and figure out what Jewish law and practice is. But Mishnah Avot, because it isn't a specifically legalistic text, invites all kinds of other commentaries. And in this case, we're going to be looking at the commentaries of the Hasidic masters. That is the great mystical tradition that emerged in Europe in the 18th century. And we have an opportunity to look at these Hasidic masters when we look at Mishnah Avot, because the Hasidic movement was not a particularly legalistic movement. That is, they kept the law, but that wasn't their focus. Their focus was spirituality, right? And I'm oversimplifying, of course, but there's some sense in which we can call the Hasidic movement a kind of a spiritualist revival, right? A new seeking for the divine, for God, for the experience of God. And with that, I want to say one last thing before we head into our material, which is to say that there's actually something a little strange about the very phrasing of the ethics of the mystics, right? Like that is, usually we don't think of ethics as a mystical course of study, because mysticism, and again, I'm oversimplifying, but just to make the point, mysticism writ large has something to do with that search for the divine, the transcendent, God, that sort of mystical, unknowable experience. And so most mystical writing we think of as the cultivation of the spiritual life or the relationship with God, and not as much a different genre of Jewish discussion or of religious discussion, which is ethics, how we treat one another here on the human plane, right? So there's something, we have an opportunity here because there is so much literature. Avot is the most commented on tractate of the Mishnah, and the Hasidic masters who would usually comment on narrative sections of the Torah also often took up Mishnah Avot because it is such a classic collection of proverbs and teachings. So we have an opportunity to see, what do the mystics have to say about these ethical teachings? What is the mystical spin on these famous ethical maxims that the rabbis issued in the 2nd century? Okay, so that's all the information that you'll need to kind of get oriented here. Let's say now a blessing, and then we'll get into the material. We'll say a blessing over our practice of Torah study, our holy practice of Torah study, and the blessing ends. La'asok b'divrei Torah, to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, and evoking the language of liturgy, let me also wish you a Chodesh Tov, a good new month. We're starting the new month today, and also remind us that we counted the 15th day of the Omer last night. Okay, and we're in that counting process because that's exactly what I was saying up front. We're counting our way from Passover to Shavuot. There are 50 days, 49 days between them, right? 50th is Shavuot, and we're now on the 15th of those days. So we're really in this period, and as I'll say one more time, this is a tradition. We are now engaging in a well-established Jewish tradition to study this material during this time. So there's something about what we're going to learn today that is meant to prepare us for a spiritual experience that is upcoming. Okay, so let's get into it. And we're going to look now at, we have 5 sessions. And so we're going to look at the 5 original chapters of Mishnah Avot. There's a 6th one, but it was added later. So we're going to look at the 5 original, and we'll do 1 week at a time. So we're going to look at a Mishnah from the 1st chapter, but we're going to have an opportunity soon enough to look at some teachings on that Mishnah by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, I say Hasidic masters, but he is one of the most masterful of Hasidic masters, one of the most famous of Hasidic masters. And today, we're going to look at perhaps his most famous teaching. Okay, so you're going to get really core Rabbi Nachman, and his school is Breslov. So you're going to get core Breslov Hasidus. And we get there through Mishnah Avot. Okay, so let's do it. Let's take a look. Here is a source sheet for us to look at, and we're going to start slow, or we're going to start basic by just looking at that Mishnah, the Mishnah that will start us off today. Here's the source sheet. And it's another classic, right? If I am not for myself, that's a classic Mishnah. Here's another classic. You may know some of these phrases like aseh l'charav, make for yourself a teacher, kne l'cha chaver, or acquire for yourself a friend. These are the teachings of Yoshua ben Prachia. Okay, very early in the chain of transmission, Yoshua ben Prachia used to say, now this is the way Avot works. There are rabbis and they are quoted as saying things, and we get the feeling that these were their most famous teachings. If you met Yoshua ben Prachia, this is what he would have told you. These were his core principles. And I want to just say that I did all of this talking to distinguish this from legalistic texts. And part of what I mean by that is they're not grounding their teachings in the words of the Torah. Oh, the Torah says keep Shabbat, so here's what I say about that. These are really their beliefs. These are really their principles. Yes, we follow the Torah, but also here's some wisdom for you. Here's what I, a rabbi who have studied Torah my whole life, think is most important that you might not see if you just read the Torah. Okay, so here's his teaching. Rabbi Yoshua ben Prachia said, aseh l'charav, make for yourself a teacher, ukne lecha chaver, and acquire for yourself a friend, and this is the part that we're going to look at the most today, and judge all people favorably. Vehevedan et kol ha'adam l'chaf zchus. Judge everyone l'chaf zchut. Okay, this phrase here, I'm translating here as favorably, judge all people favorably. And this is the teaching we're going to look at throughout our hour today. Judge all people favorably. But just before I open it up for your interpretation, let me also explain that this language here of l'chaf zchut, it is the language of scales, because a kaf is like a hand, like one hand of a scale. And this language we see in rabbinic literature. Here's one of the most famous usages, comes from the Talmud, that says a person, look at the second source here, a person should view themselves as if they were half liable, meaning half guilty, and half meritorious, half innocent. A person should always see themselves as if they're half-half, so that if they perform one mitzvah, they are fortunate or they are happy as they tilt themselves to the scale of merit. And that's actually what I translated as favorably. You might also translate here, same word, the scale of merit, okay? And if they transgress one prohibition, woe to them, as they tilt themselves to the scale of liability, okay? So now you have a little bit of the language that will help you understand the phrasing of our teaching. There's a hand of merit and a hand of liability, and you're in these scales where you're perfectly balanced between the two scales, and you have good deeds and bad deeds, and a person should think of themselves as if they're balancing and they're trying to push the scale so it tilts on the side of the good. Okay, now let me turn over to you and ask you, what is the meaning of this teaching? You should always judge people favorably or on the scale of merit. You know, okay, assume the best. What is going on? What's that teaching about? Elizabeth, will you start us off?
So this is interestingly something I've been thinking about a lot. And to me, the secret of getting along is having empathy and trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and wondering why they've behaved the way they've behaved. And rather than quickly jump to a conclusion that they're a jerk, to judge them favorably, to try to understand where they're coming from. And that if we all did that and stopped thinking that, you know, we're the center of the universe because we can only see things through our own eyes, that it would be a better world. And I think, to me, that's what this is talking to me about. Okay,
wonderful. Now, Elizabeth has already kind of raised the level of thinking here, because we read this teaching, and just simply put, it is well, when you see a person and they do, just always assume the best, always assume good. But Elizabeth says the mechanism by which you do that is to enter a little bit into their, to walk a mile in their shoes, right? You have to leave your own perspective and try to enter into their perspective and imagine, what might be motivating them in a way that you can relate to and understand and forgive and tolerate, right? And then Elizabeth says something that has a lot of there's a lot here, but I'll leave it to you to explain it. And that makes the world a better place. It would be a better place if we were all constantly saying, oh, well, Elizabeth, surely she meant I must assume that she did this with the best of intent. We're always putting ourselves, imagining what it's like to be someone else and assuming that, that's my language. Assuming the best is my language. Elizabeth's language is trying to imagine what it's like for them, okay? And thereby coming to have sympathy for them. Anyone want to add to that? I think that's a very sophisticated way of putting it. Barbara, you want to add to that? Barbara Dalton Taylor.
How'd you know I wanted to add to that?
I saw a hand.
Oh, my hand went up?
Yeah, that's right.
That's funny.
By the way, you can raise your hands with the reaction button, and then I for sure see it, but I am always scanning the crowd, so sometimes I can see your hand go up.
I guess that's a reflex from being in school for a while.
That's great. Okay. It's mystical powers, Barbara. I'm on my...
Boy, you're hot today. I appreciate what Elizabeth said. But one of the things that is a huge hindrance to being able to put yourself in another person's shoes is, well, I shouldn't say hindrance. One of the skills required to put yourself in another person's shoes is that you can listen without attachment to your own point of view.
That's good. That's good.
And
it really is an amplification. You want to finish the thought, Barbara?
I was just going to say, and that is no small task.
Right. It really is I appreciate that thought so much, and it really is an extension or an amplification of what Elizabeth was talking about. A separate thought, but I think a related thought, which is that part of what makes it difficult for me to judge someone favorably is that I'm thinking about how it affected me.
Right.
And I'm involved, and I have a bias, obviously, for myself. So when someone, it isn't just someone out there in the world, but in Barbara's imagination, someone who perhaps has affronted me, or I disapprove, but I'm going to take myself out of it. I'm going to take how it affects me, or even my value system out. I'm going to try to remove myself from the picture. And that's part of how I get into that consciousness. Okay, yeah, that's quite profound. All right, let's take the three hands that are up, and then we're going to start looking at Hasidic teaching. So Ken, and then Matt, and then Jen.
It appears to me to be one half of the phrase, "You shall not oppress the widow, the orphan, or the foreigner who lives among you."
Explain. Say why.
Well, this is an ethical requirement or statement to judge people favorably, sort of a presumption of favorability, which seems to be a later development from the earlier statement in Torah that you shall not oppress the widow, the orphan, and the resident alien, who would likely be presumed adversely by you, by a person.
Good. Okay, so Ken does some great work of really kind of tethering this all the way back to the earliest sources, because Ken suggests, and I think wisely, this mechanism inside of us that would allow us to judge favorably is rooted in a deep and ancient, maybe the most deep and ancient of Jewish ethics, which is the ethic of compassion or sympathy that we have been training ourselves in, having just moved through Passover. That's the Passover teaching. You were slaves in Egypt. You know what it's like to suffer. So don't oppress other people. Try to enter into their perspective. Try to have sympathy and compassion for others who might be suffering, because you know what it was like when you suffered. So this idea of trying to enter into someone else's consciousness, right, and to have sympathy for them, that's a very ancient Jewish teaching, and this might be a kind of further development of it. Matt?
There we go. Okay. I hate to, I see 4 ways that this is important. I think the world is a better place, as it was Elizabeth who talked first, my mind went blank, said that if we do that, we will get along better. I think it is separate from that. It has to be an ethical rule, regardless of whether it works or not, that we have to do that to be something. And now I've forgotten the 4th, but the 3rd, the most important to me, is I think it is personally better for me. I am a happier person in this world if I treat people generously. I am less distressed. I am less unhappy, even when I'm wrong, even when they are bad people doing bad things. If I am kind and good and generous to them, I am better off. So purely selfishly, purely just gut level selfishness, it is better for me to treat people well.
Okay, wonderful. So this is really, what Matt's doing is interesting, because there are many ways of thinking about ethics. And one of them is to say, practically, what kind of world does this create? And Elizabeth was suggesting that, right? We will all treat each other better if we assume the best in one another, and then there will be more harmony in society. Matt says, I'd like to think of this, though, as no matter what happens, it's just good. It's just a good practice. And part of the reason that it's good is because of the way that it affects me and my tranquility as I walk through the world. I will live with greater peace and harmony if I walk around the world and I just see people doing good. And I try to see people doing good. And when I see people doing bad, I reframe it so that once again, I'm in harmony, because I have, and that's my inner experience. Now, part of what, I appreciate that thought on its own, but part of what's so helpful about that thought that Matt gives us is that Matt is kind of taking us in the direction that Rabbi Nachman will soon take us, which is to think of not just about the other, but how does this mechanism of judging favorably end up affecting myself, my sense of self? Okay, and Rabbi Nachman's going to have a different spin on it, but Matt is pointing us in that direction. Okay, one last comment before we look at Rabbi Nachman from Jen.
Okay. I kind of want to be a fly in the ointment on this one. And let me start by saying I actually teach this as a skill a lot with my clients, and I don't think that there's no place for it. But oppressed people have been asked to do this toward their oppressors far, far, far too often. And we have a tendency to over-sympathize with people who are like us, who do oppressive things, which is like thinking about the Chauvin trial going on right now. Absolutely not am I going to apply this ethic to somebody like Chauvin. Like, absolutely not am I going to apply this ethic to people who are actively oppressing me or actively oppressing groups that I care about. So there has to be some kind of limit or caveat on this particular ethic, in my opinion.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much for that, Jen, because that's important, right? And we do it very easily in legalistic conversations. What about this? What about this? But when we're in ethical conversations, it's very easy to get swept up away with beautiful ideas. But remember, this is our form of study is a debate. And this person has just offered their opinion, Yeshua ben Prachia's opinion on the good way to live. Now, wait a minute. What are the implications of this ethic? And Jen asks, are there limits? Right? And let's keep Jen's question in mind and continue to push back. We don't have to accept any of this, but we're also going to push back on Jen, or Rabbi Nachman is anyway. Rabbi Nachman is going to give us a formula, and I'm going to turn back to Jen later and ask Jen what she thinks of this, because Rabbi Nachman's formula does seem to push us to think of even the worst people Well, you'll see. Let's take a look. Let's get into it now. All right. So Rabbi Nachman, this is now. I must say, Rabbi Nachman. Let's do just a minute of introduction here. It's he is truly one of the great geniuses of Jewish tradition and one of the greatest of the Hasidic masters. And he is he's the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. He has like lineage. He taught in the Ukraine mostly, and he's become very famous, especially for a couple of key phrases or core teachings. Maybe you know some of them from the songs that have been made from them. Like, what do you know Rabbi Nachman teachings? Anyone know like the classic Rabbi Nachman teachings? There's a couple of songs. One is Kol Haolam Kulo. The whole world is a very narrow bridge. V'ha'ikar, and the essential thing is not to be afraid. So you can hear that's a kind of a mystical teaching. Like, what do you mean the world is a narrow bridge? The essential thing, Ikar, that's our name as a community. The essential thing is not to be afraid. That's a famous Rabbi Nachman teaching because it was turned into a song. There's another famous Rabbi Nachman teaching that was turned into a song. And if you were here at 12, you heard it. It was the song we came in with, which is Mitzvah Gedola Liot B'Simcha Tamid. It is a great mitzvah, great commandment to be happy always. All right, now, talk about pushing back again. What does that mean? Like, be happy all the time? That doesn't sound like good advice. But that's what Rabbi Nachman says and is famous for saying. It is a mitzvah. It's a commandment to try to be happy at all times. Okay. Now, the teaching we're going to look at today actually plays off that concept of happiness. It's a very core principle for Rabbi Nachman. But those are songs. Those two little jingles are the way that Rabbi Nachman is known in the wider world. But in Breslov, in the Hasidic community that celebrates Rabbi Nachman's teachings, in that community, this teaching that we're going to look at, Reish Pei Beis, right, the 280 and 82, is the classic teaching. It's the one that, as you'll soon see, Breslov followers are told to keep with them at all times. This is the core. If you're going to read one thing from Rabbi Nachman, this is it. And so here we are, I'm going to read it today. So let's take a look. And he starts with this teaching from Avot, from the Mishnah that we've been looking at. So Rabbi Nachman says that, and when he starts, this language is really interesting. No. His first word is just know this. Know this. Okay? Know that one must judge everyone favorably. That's just a quote. Okay, know this. We're taught this in the Mishnah. Now, here is Rabbi Nachman's teaching on it, and we're going to look at two parts. Okay, and the first part, we're not going to look at the whole thing because it's long and complicated. But the first part kind of gives us the basic framework, and as I said, it will begin to push back on the limits that Jen tried to establish. Because Rabbi Nachman really wants us to do this with everybody. But let's just see how he suggests that works. Okay, so how do you judge everyone favorably? He says, even someone who is completely wicked, afilu mishehu rasha gamor, a completely wicked person, it is necessary to search and find in them some modicum of good. Some modicum of good. Modicum is it's a vocabulary word. It's not a common word, but it's a good word for trying to translate this phrase in Hebrew. Eze me'at tov, some little bit of good. Try to find in some people some little, this is already different, by the way, than just judge them favorably. The way that you judge them favorably is by trying to find some little piece of good in them. And by finding in them a modicum of good, we're back in the English, finding in them a modicum of good and so judging them favorably, one genuinely elevates them to the scale of merit and can bring them to tshuva. Okay, so let's just start. I'm trying to decide whether we should read a little further first. Let's just read one more paragraph, okay? Because he has a proof text for this. Okay, and the proof text is a verse from Psalms, And he says, this is the aspect of, this is very particular to him. He uses this language all the time. The zebichinat, this is the aspect of, it's just his way of saying, this is connected to. This is connected to the verse in Psalms that says, in a little bit, the wicked one will be no longer. You will look to his place and he will not be there. Okay, now that verse in Psalms, Psalm 37, here, let's go find it. Psalm 37. Let's just go find it and just take a look at it in its context, because as you can see, it looks like it's about the end of bad people on this earth. For evil men will be cut off, but those who look to the Lord, they shall inherit the land. A little longer and there will be no wicked man. You will look at where he was, he will be gone. And here's the phrase, the meek shall inherit the earth, but the lowly shall inherit the land. Okay, so that's the simple meaning of the verse. Like, eventually there will be no more wicked people. But Rabbi Nachman says that is, Scripture is warning us to judge everyone favorably. Now, what does he mean by that? Okay, he just said that, but what's the connection to this verse? That even if you see that someone is completely wicked, you must search and seek the little bit of good in them where they are not wicked. He's making a play on the word in a little bit. Okay, so same phrase up here, me'at tov, a little bit, some little bit of good. So in the original, the verse is, in a little bit, the wicked one will be no longer. But in Rabbi Nachman's phrasing, it is od me'at ve'ein rasha. Here he explains it. This is the meaning of in a little bit, the wicked one will be no longer. You must seek the little bit of good that he still has within him, because in that place, he is not wicked. For although he is wicked, how is it possible that he does not still possess even a little bit of good? Is it possible that throughout his life, he never once did some mitzvah or good deed? And okay, so let's just stop there. Now, just one last time, there's a play on the language of the verse, and this is, the mystics are comfortable with wordplay here. Instead of in a little bit, the wicked one will be no longer, what he is saying is read it as with the little bit that you find, the wicked one becomes no longer wicked. Okay, do you understand the connection there? Okay, either way, the basic teaching is this. When we see wicked, even wicked people, we have to look, is there something good about, and find it, and search for it, and find it. And, Jen, this means Derek Chauvin, and it means Hitler, and it means Donald Trump, and it means every person that you don't like. You have to, isn't it possible that they're completely wicked? You find that little nikuda, that little point of goodness in them. Okay, so that's the basic teaching. Now, that is different than what we've been talking about so far. Assuming the best, putting yourself in their shoes, trying to understand. It's different than like, oh, I want to understand how Derek Chauvin came to do that. No, Rabbi Nachman is saying, whatever else they did do, find that little bit of good in them. Okay, so now, what's the, so now I want to open it up. What's the difference between these two? And why is Rabbi Nachman trying to push us in this direction of finding that little point of good? Okay, so Jen, do you want to respond to this first?
I think Eric wanted to ask a question first.
All right, let's go to Eric then.
Yes, I hope I didn't jump the line. I'm just curious. I mean, that idea, find the little bit of good even in the worst, feels to me like that's coming from that mystical place. That's coming from that place of searching for the underlying spiritual essence that might not be visible in the actions, etc. That's some kind of, original, beautiful spark. It seems very different than the ethical question, which is, what do we do about a Derek Chauvin? What do we do about a Hitler or a Trump or whomever, who may have whatever divine spark that's been corroded by whatever, but the question is, what do we do about who they are and how they impact the world? So it seems to me that it's that mystical question, that ethical question, they might both be interesting and interrelated in some ways, but it seems they're different inquiries.
Yes, I think that's right, Eric. And I think that's very well put. right? Because we do have a spiritual reference point for thinking about the way in which all human beings are essentially sacred. I mean, it's a human being after all. And this is the Tselem Elohim, the divine image that is within us all. And yes, even within Hitler. But Eric points out, and Eric is right, that's different than saying, well, I'm sure they behaved good or they are good. And so they have some inherent human dignity, but that's different than justifying their behavior. Now, again, I want to push back though, or I think Rabbi Nachman is pushing back on Eric, on Eric's distinction by saying, yeah, no, I'm not talking about the divine spark. I'm actually asking you to, is it possible that throughout his life, he never once did some mitzvah or good deed? Meaning the challenge here is, and I think I saw Richard put that in the chat, yes, but he loved his mother, right? The challenge here is, and the criticism I can already hear of, but the challenge here is, no, everybody has actually done some good in the world. Rabbi Nachman says it's impossible that a person didn't actually not just embody some divinity, but actually perform that in the world. And Rabbi Nachman is calling upon you to look for that. Now, Richard puts in the chat, yes, but he loved his mother, as a kind of a joke, I think, right, Richard? As if to say, like, okay, cool, like, great. He, like, everybody loves it. Like, Hitler loved his mother, but that doesn't make any difference to us, does it? But Rabbi Nachman seems to be saying maybe it does. Maybe it does. What do you think, Eric? Yeah.
And my question to him is, all right, look for that, but to what end? Is it so you see this person and you judge this person in the totality of their being and all the good they've done and all the bad they've done, it just from a matter of intellectual honesty, so you understand fully who they are? Or is he saying, look for the good so you mitigate what kind of punishment you might give for the bad, or you might treat him differently when he transgresses? Like, what to what end are we looking for that good? Is, I guess that would be my question to him. If
that's a really good
question. Here,
let's turn it out.
Rabbi,
that's a really good. What is the point of this? It's so nice you found that one little point of, but what does that really do? How does that really help us? Right? So, okay, great. I see Jen's hand is back up, and I'd love to hear Jen's thoughts on this.
I think Eric really hit the nail on the head with a lot of where I was coming from, which is, you know, I don't really care what's in your heart if you're oppressing me. If you're killing me, I don't care if you were good to your mom. I don't care at all. So this ethic works in a world where there is a framework of justice that I can rely on, that I know that we are going to counterbalance the niceness with some goodness. In the way that we treat people who are oppressed, that we're not going to ask people who are being killed to sympathize with their killer for their own mental and emotional good. If they're saying, you're not listening to me when I say this person's killing me, do something about it. So I think that, like, where this works is when there's a dialectic between this ethic of good and some ethic of justice, of like doing something in the world about it. But if you don't expect justice, then asking someone to sit for their spiritual good in the sympathy or the saying, yeah, like, of course, no one's totally evil, duh, we get that. And they're still killing us, do something about it. It can just stop us from actually pursuing justice in the way we need to.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so that's very well formulated. Imagine that a person is 99% bad. And let's just say, what does that even mean? But let's say they did 100 things and 99 of them were bad. And they did one good thing. So Jen is saying, okay, I can live in a world where there's a system for acknowledging that most of their actions are evil. And yeah, of course, we can say one of their actions were good. But Rabbi Nachman seems to be asking me to say, oh, I found the one good thing. Okay, it's all good now. It's all good now. And that doesn't, like, is Rabbi Nachman really asking me to, like, focus on that 1% to the point where I no longer acknowledge the 99%? There's something, I need to take this to its extreme is to begin to lose all sense of justice in the world. So very well put. Devin. Hello, Devin.
Hi, yeah, so I think that maybe this has to do with like teshuvah and personal development and stuff like that, because basically if you try to ask the question, like, is there anyone in the world who actually happens to be like 1 in a billion who really is 100% evil somehow? It's like, that's not so much the point. The point is more, I think, to reflect on the idea that And I'm also thinking about other ideas that Rabbi Nachman has expressed in his writings, which have a lot to do with kind of the idea that like the more intense like a transgression or sin is, the more potential there is for an even more intense teshuva. And then that more intense teshuva is actually like somehow going to be more powerful than what the whole situation would have been to begin with. And so then basically applying this in like a self-development or like self-awareness kind of way, you can kind of just reflect on your own life and be like, okay, is there anything that I've done in my life where I just feel like it was so 100% evil? And then you have to just realize like, there's no way that it was 100%. And like, just reflecting on anything that you've done in your life and then realizing that there's that potential to turn that negativity into teshuva and then turn the negativity into something that's like so much more positive than it ever would have been. That's something that I think resonates a lot. So this doesn't solve the problem of like the justice system and that whole question that Jen is bringing up, which is a really important question. I have no idea how to answer that one, but basically I think that this ethic can still apply if you kind of do it as like a personal development kind of thing, reflecting on our own lives and realizing that nobody's perfect.
Beautiful, wonderful, wonderful. Devin, so nice to meet you. I don't think we've met before, but what a wonderful entry into our discussion. Devin provides us with such an important pivot point to start moving to the second half of our conversation. And the way that Devin does so is by focusing on the concept of tshuva. Tshuva, which is a difficult word to translate, return, repentance, self-work, self-repair, all these things, right? And the truth is, Rabbi Nachman uses that language. So one answer to the question of like, that Eric asks, so what? So, okay, you find this, what do you do with that? So one answer, Rabbi Nachman says, is that it has something to do with tshuva. So we're gonna look for a second at how that looks. But then Devin says, and once we've established that this is about tshuva, that process of return, this is the word we use on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We do tshuva, we come back, we return, we repair, we get back to ourselves. Once you've established that this is about that, then Devin wonders, what does that mean for me? And that's exactly where Rabbi Nachman goes. Okay, so we have 15 minutes left, so I'm sort of like I'm going to truncate the first part of our discussion here and move us to the second. But using Devin's language here, I'll just remind us that what Rabbi Nachman said was that you here, let's look here. By your finding within him a little bit of good, wherein he is not wicked, and you're judging him favorably, you genuinely elevate him from the scale of guilt to the scale of merit, until as a result of this, he returns in tshuva. Okay, now this is the truncating. Okay, I'm gonna try and like say what I think is going on here, and then we're gonna move to the next piece. But I'm saying this, what I really want is to open it up and discuss this for a while, but let's just keep it in mind. What I think he's saying here is that somehow, and this is the mystical part, when you find someone's goodness, somehow you redeemed them. They didn't do tshuva, did they? But you kind of you returned them to the side of good. You did tshuva for them, right? Like by reflecting on what was good about, by putting yourself in their shoes, by finding the one, whatever it is, you somehow like spiritually, this is the mystical part, somehow spiritually, you move them over to the side of, you saved them. Okay, now this is not satisfying to the dilemmas that Jen has presented us with. This does seem like you redeemed Derek Chauvin, you do, but there is something, now we're getting into the mysticism. There's something mystical about just by thinking about it, you transform that person's status in the world, in your consciousness. I don't know. Okay. Because we have 15 minutes left, though, I want to leave that thought hanging. What does it mean for you to, through your consciousness, transform the being of the worth of this person, the merit of this person? But what's really powerful about this teaching is the second piece, because so far we've just been talking about the way that you do this for other people, and it does present all of these these dilemmas, these questions of justice. But in the second paragraph, let's say, the second piece, the second part of Rabbi Nachman's teaching, he brings us to the piece that is really famous, the piece that actually Rabbi Nachman wants to carry with us at all times, and that is the movement to the self that Devin was anticipating. So take a look here. We're gonna move down here to part 2. Okay, so he's gone through this whole process with someone else, but then he says, and so too, a person must also find this within themselves. Okay, for it is well known that a person must take great care to be happy always and to keep very far away from depression. And you can see the parentheses here as it has been explained in our works a number of times. In other words, like, mitzvah gedola liot b'simcha. It's a great commandment to be. This is a big teaching for Rabbi Nachman. He's even referencing it in his own book. We talk about this all the time. It's so hard to be happy, and you have to really strive to be happy. And the way that you do this is through the same mechanism of looking for some good in yourself. Okay, so let's just continue for a while, and then I want to hear what you think about it. So it may be that when one begins examining oneself, one sees that one possesses no good whatsoever. You look at yourself, and I'm the person who's 99% wicked, and I'm filled with sin, and that as a result, and this is, talk about mysticism, I don't even know how to translate this. Habal davar, the master of the thing, is the actual, but it's usually translated as the evil one, some evil force out there. The evil one wants to cause you, because of your sin, to fall into sadness and black bitterness. This is a phrase that he uses often. Marash chora, the black bitterness, the bile almost inside of us that we feel that causes us to be depressed. This is, again, mysticism. This is his language. Some kind of black bitter substance inside of us. And we look at ourselves and we feel that we are completely full of sin. Even so, he says, it is forbidden to fall on account of this. Rather, one must search until one finds in oneself some little bit of good. Same language here. For how is it possible that throughout one's life, they never once did some mitzvah or good deed? And now I want to just add one more thing before I open it up to you, which is, okay, you have to look for this in yourself. And then when you find it, he says, that even when one begins examining this good thing, you found something good in yourself, but nevertheless, you see that it too is filled with flaws and contains no purity. In other words, you see that the mitzvah, the holy deed that one merited doing, is in itself full of hidden agendas and strange thoughts and all kinds of inconsistencies. Even your best part is filled with all kinds of muck. Nevertheless, how is it possible that this mitzvah or holy deed contains not even a little bit of good? For in any case, despite this, there must have been some good point in the mitzvah or good deed that they did. Okay, so and then he continues on, right? Same basic formulation, same basic idea, which is that you look at yourself and you think, oh my gosh, I'm worthless, I'm wicked, I'm awful. But you gotta search for that thing in yourself. You do the same thing for yourself that you do for everyone else. And it actually starts to feel like actually what's most important is that you do it for yourself. The only other thing is that you do it for yourself in order to not just judge yourself favorably, but to push depression away, to push sadness away. Okay? So now tell me, what do you think of this? We had a good little debate around the finding it in someone else, but what do you think about finding it in yourself? Right? How does that mechanism work, and what do you think of it? The search for the one little point of good within yourself. Okay, I'll turn to Jamie, who's got his hand up.
Hey.
Hey.
I wanted to address the first part of the discussion, but I think
That's okay.
I could potentially weave in. I can see how I can fit in this.
It's okay.
This part here. Just, I think that this ethic is coming to, as Judaism at this time and other religions at this time were coming to try to do, is replace the idea of a society or justice system based purely on revenge, or the revenge cycle that's just a common impulse in humans, that you're oppressing me, I'm going to impress you back. And it will just never end because we're constantly trying to push our justice on another person by force, or by authority, however we do it. And this notion, this ethical notion, comes into the world that says the only way to end the revenge cycle is for me to look in myself and in others for that little kernel of good to say, I can stop oppressing this person who I feel is oppressing me, because I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And the moment I can do that, the moment we can move towards peace and we can move towards justice and away from revenge. Does that make sense?
Oh. Yeah, I think that does make sense. And in fact, this is the best formulation that we've had for kind of a counterpoint to Jen, and not aggressively so, but a possible counterpoint to Jen's position, which is to say, maybe what Rabbi Nachman is asking us to do is, yes, to ignore justice, to go beyond justice, to try to put aside all of the questions of well, you did this and I did this, and you actually, in a sense, you don't, right? We've talked about scales, but maybe Rabbi Nachman is asking us to put the scales aside and just always be searching for the good, right? You want to add to that? Yeah, Jamie?
Just add one thing. I think there's a distinction. Definitely think about Rabbi Nachman, who's addressing himself to people's hearts, I think, in the way that, in his Torah. And he's not necessarily talking about a justice system. I think it's the idea that in our hearts, when we're walking in the street, are we trying to judge people favorably? And does that create a larger social ethic, as opposed to, are we going to take this and codify it in some sort of law? I don't think that.
Okay, great. Okay, that's helpful also, because let's in these last 5 minutes, let's leave, we have really serious, larger questions of how we apply justice in the social order, and I thank our group for surfacing those. But for now, let's just say we can't resolve that tension entirely. Let's now just move to thinking about the kind of how you walk in the world question that Rabbi Nachman seems to be asking of us, which is that when you walk in the world, you are walking around looking for good in everybody, and perhaps most importantly, that trains you. I'm inserting the language of training, but there's at least some sort of parallel between that action and what you actually need to do, which is to learn to find the good in yourself. Okay, so again, I ask, what do you think of that mechanism of the searching for good in everyone as a way of ultimately searching for the good in yourself? Okay, let's turn to Joel and then Jan. Joel?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So just to go back to the original quote from Avot, chapter 1, verse 6, make for yourself a teacher, acquire for yourself a friend, and then the end that we've been talking about, and judge all people favorably. I'm trying to see how it all hangs together. And it seems to be saying you can't only by yourself be able to find the spark of goodness, either within yourself or in other people, unless you have some direction because you've found yourself a teacher and because you've acquired for yourself a friend. There's this interpersonal understanding that happens. You isolated alone cannot, you will be at great pains to judge all people favorably unless you are part of the community and you are part of the consciousness that comes from teaching and learning.
Okay, that's a beautiful reading, and thank you for bringing us back to the original teaching. A beautiful reading of that first Mishnah, which is, I think Joel suggests that, and then I think this is a really good key into what Rabbi Nachman is asking here. If the goal here is removing yourself from this sadness, this sort of self maybe loathing or depression, or just that's the goal. You're trying to figure out how to be alive and happy and free and, and positive in this world. In order to do that, Rabbi Nachman seems to suggest you need to start by doing it to other people. You need to, that's why I use the language of training. Our ability to work on ourselves is forged through our social skills. Okay, and this is a chiddush. This is an insight that Rabbi Nachman is offering, is that you go around the world looking for this good, and then you become more able to, you learn how from your interactions with other people to turn back in at yourself and say, I too must be good. And if I don't feel that way, I have to look harder, to try harder. Okay, so the social realm trains us, prepares us, is requisite for the work of inside, that inside work of bringing myself back. Jan?
Yeah, this is
Jan Yaffe?
Yeah, this is a great discussion. I would add that compassion is the way that I try to do that for myself and in the world. That looking for the good is the goal, certainly, but compassion is the bridge. If I can feel my heart open up with compassion for people and for myself, self-compassion for the ways that I fail myself and others, I think that softens my judgment of myself and others and allows me to be open and accepting and forgiving.
Compassion. Okay, so compassion, and compassion that leads to self-compassion. Yes. Self-compassion, and that seems to be the goal here, is searching for a way to have compassion for yourself, to sympathize with yourself, to love yourself even, right? Mm-hmm. And Rabbi Nachman seems to feel that the way that you get there is to be searching for good within yourself. And look at his language here. We're almost out of time. So look at how he ends here. He says that you do this, you revive yourselves and bring joy to your soul with the little bit of good they find in themselves, that even if once in one's life, one merited doing a mitzvah or a good deed. And then he says, and so likewise, one must go on searching until one finds in oneself yet another good thing. And although this good thing too is mixed with much impurity, still one must extract some good point from there as well. Indeed, one must go on searching and gathering further good points. And then he goes on to some really mystical stuff, which we'll leave aside there. But that's the idea, that you try, if you're not feeling good about yourself, look what, and I will ask you, since we're actually in the period of not just learning, but working on ourselves, spend this next week trying to find something good in yourself. And maybe that's easy for you, right? But maybe it's hard. And once you find something good about yourself, find something else, and find something else, and find something else, and continue to search for the goodness in yourself as a way of bringing joy to yourself, bringing life to yourself, and bringing yourself back to that scale where you can judge yourself favorably. So, there's so much more here to process and think about, and I wish that we could keep talking about this, but because I'm not leaving you with a dogma here. All right, we can continue to disagree with that psychological formulation. Jen presented us with some problems with it as applied to the social realm. But what about in the personal realm? I leave off asking you, do you think that that's a good psychology, to constantly be looking for the good in yourself? Or is there something missing in that as well, right? But this is what Rabbi Nachman asks us to do all the time. And in fact, one more quote from our teaching today. Towards the end, there's a parentheses, and it's inserted by Rabbi Nachman's students, right? So you have a little bit of a voice of Rabbi Nachman's community coming in, and it pops in with a parentheses and says, and our Rebbe of blessed memory cautioned us to walk with this teaching constantly. Leilach im Torah hazot, constantly. And then he says, for it is a major foundation for anyone who wishes to draw closer to God. Now, that's quite a That's quite a last thought to just leave hanging in the air. We haven't talked a lot about God so far, but somehow he also thinks that part of what this does, this movement, this searching for the good in oneself, searching for even the littlest bit of good, that is actually, there's another thing that it does, which is it brings you closer to God. So we need another hour to talk about that. But that, I'll at least leave us with the mechanism, with that practice, and ask us to maybe try it this week, to look for the good in yourself, and maybe try to look for the good in others and see what the relationship is between those two things. So we'll leave it off there, but this is going to be what we're doing for the next 5 weeks, looking at these classic teaching and then starting to look at how some of the mystical teachers spin them out into perhaps controversial, right? Perhaps teachings that we can't fully digest, but you can see how they take us into a kind of a different realm of ethical behavior, and one that starts in the consciousness. Okay, so we'll leave it off there. Thanks everybody for joining me, and I hope to see you again next week. And happy counting your way through the Omer.